We've heard stories about people surviving in the desert, Amazon forest, and uninhabited islands for weeks. Such stories show how tough and resilient people can be. But among these many cases, there is one that can really amaze you. It's the story about a guy who spent 3 days inside a sunken ship at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't have oxygen tanks, electricity, communications, or food, but he survived. So, it all happened in 2013 on a tugboat that was moving through the Atlantic waters along the coast of Nigeria. That day, early in the morning, there was a small storm. The tug was pulling a vessel with oil tanks. Then, all of a sudden, a huge wave formed. It crashed into the ship and broke the cable. At 4:30 a.m., the tugboat turned upside down. Its entire deck was underwater, and the ship's hull stuck out from the surface. The boat began to sink slowly. The crew of 12 people were trapped, as they all were in their locked rooms. They had closed the doors in their cabins as a precaution, since there were many pirates in those waters. Because of the locked rooms, they couldn't get out. But one of them, cook Harrison Okene, was in the bathroom during this time. The bathroom turned over. Harrison fell on the ceiling. All the clothes and toilet shelves fell on his head. He was stunned and didn't understand what was happening. When he heard the screams of the other crew members, he realized that the ship was sinking. Harrison struggled to his feet. Holding onto the walls, he slowly went out of the cabin. The water level rose above his head. Harrison took a deep breath. He intuitively, driven by fear, reached the engineering room. There was a small pocket with air. This space wasn't wholly flooded, since the water didn't get there, and the air hadn't come out. Harrison realized that this was the safest place for him at that moment. He had no fresh water and no food. He was in a cold, damp room. The floor was flooded, and Harrison's feet began to freeze. There was almost no chance of survival. The man found a soda bottle inside the room and a life jacket with 2 flashlights attached to it. By this time, the ship had descended to the bottom of the ocean at a depth of 100 feet. This is about the height of a 10-story building. The ship's hull was squeezed and made a grinding noise due to the pressure of the water. Then, Harrison heard a strange movement outside the door. It was sharks and other fish that were investigating the deck. At this point, Harrison began to lose hope. Lack of food supplies and pressure weren't the main problems. The air pocket was small, which meant there was little oxygen. Every 24 hours, an average person consumes about 350 cubic feet of air, which means Harrison had less than 1 day left to breathe. But despite this, he lived in such conditions for about 60 hours. This happened thanks to the water. The pressure around the ship was so intense that it compressed the air by about 4 times. Another problem was the cook's breathing. When we inhale, we absorb oxygen. When we exhale, we release carbon dioxide. This substance is dangerous to your health if its concentration in the air is 5%. Harrison slowly filled the room with carbon dioxide, and he couldn't get out. With each hour, it became harder to breathe. But here again, he was lucky. Water absorbs carbon dioxide, and Harrison moved and splashed it in different directions. Thus, unknowingly, he increased the water area and kept the carbon dioxide level below critical. But even here, his dangers were not over. Hypothermia may occur in a dark, cold room. It's a condition when your body temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. You get cold, and your perception of the world gets distorted. You don't understand where you are and what's going on. You may lose your memory and even experience terminal burrowing. This weird behavior occurs during hypothermia when a person tries to find a small shelter, even if they're in a closed room. They can even start digging the cold floor with their bare hands. At the same time, a person quickly freezes and loses consciousness within 2 hours. Harrison's room was filled from below with icy water. He wouldn't have survived in such conditions if he had stayed on the floor for several hours. But he managed to build a small platform with a mattress. This kept him slightly above the water level. With each passing hour, fear and despair more and more bound the survivor's mind. He couldn't get out for many reasons. One of them was that only a little sunlight passes to such a depth, and Harrison couldn't see it. The soda bottle was almost empty, and the flashlight stopped working. The man found himself in pitch darkness, but his salvation was close. While rescuers were searching for survivors nearby, he was thinking about his family and life. Harrison noticed rays of light through a hole in the wreckage. Divers were examining the seabed. It was the only chance to survive. Harrison came out of the air pocket and swam towards the rescuers. He was making his way through the darkness. The ray of light coming from the diver's flashlight disappeared. Harrison tried blindly to find the diver, but they were at the other end of the deck. His oxygen was running out, so Harrison decided to return. There was almost no air left in his lungs. He began to suffocate, but still got to the rescue room. The main thing was not to despair. It was his only chance for salvation. After catching his breath and replenishing the oxygen supply in his lungs, Harrison made a second attempt. He got out of the room and noticed the diver. He swam towards them with all of his might. The lifeguard didn't see Harrison, so the cook knocked on his neck from behind and grabbed his hand tightly. The diver was initially scared, but he realized a living person was in front of him. Harrison swam to his room and led the lifeguard as his oxygen ran out. You can easily find a recording from the diver's camera on the internet, where the frightened Harrison was in his rescue room during a meeting with the diver. The rescuers gave him an oxygen mask. They didn't believe there was a living person in front of them. Harrison couldn't immediately get to the surface because of the pressure. He spent about 60 hours on the seabed, so he needed to change the pressure level slowly to prevent damage to his health. Therefore, the divers put him in a decompression chamber to gradually reduce the external pressure. Then, when Harrison got out, he saw the stars. The cook thought that he had been at the bottom of the ocean all day, so he was surprised when he found out that he had been underwater for 60 hours. Also, he thought that all the crew members had forgotten about him and left the ship at the beginning. Many years have passed since then, but Harrison still has nightmares about his air room. Sometimes he wakes up in the middle of the night and tells his wife that the bed is sinking and they're now at sea. A similar case occurred in 1991 with scuba diver Michael Proudfoot. He was studying a sunken submarine off the coast of Baja, California. During this dive, he accidentally broke his breathing regulator and deprived himself of oxygen reserves. Michael couldn't get to the surface because he was too deep. He wouldn't have had enough air in his lungs. Fortunately, the diver found an air pocket inside the ship. He swam there and waited for rescuers. For 2 days, he was underwater in complete darkness. He ate raw sea urchins and drank a small amount of warm water from a found pot. Fortunately, rescuers found him. Michael Proudfoot got out of the trap and stayed alive.
So get this, you're more likely to encounter a unicorn in a coffee shop than survive at the bottom of the ocean without air for more than half an hour. But some people are that lucky and unlucky at the same time. Take Chris Lemons, for example. Chris Lemons is a commercial saturation diver whose life changed in September 2012. It was a normal working day for him and his colleagues Duncan and David. They were sitting in a special chamber on the ship above the diving site. Then they entered a diving bell, crammed like sardines in a can. This is like another chamber dangling from the ship, which they use to get to the diving site. This chamber is like the claw machine you catch toys with, but instead of a claw, it has a small chamber at the end. They arrived at the diving site, and Chris and Dave prepared to dive. Duncan was staying in the bell to monitor the gear and, the most crucial part, the umbilical cord. This cord supplies divers with oxygen, heat, and power to keep their lights shining because at such a depth, it's super dark. So it's important for someone to monitor the situation since divers' lives depend on it. To better understand the process, you must know more about commercial saturation diving. Being in the office the whole day is much safer than being a commercial saturation diver, unless your office is in a lion's cage. Saturation diving is so rare and dangerous that you've probably just heard about it now. You must dive deep in the cold ocean to work on oil pipes and such. Diving in general can be risky because of something called decompression sickness. If you dive too deep and rise to the surface too quickly, tiny bubbles of nitrogen can form inside your body, which can cause serious health issues or worse. That is not a problem for regular divers because they don't dive nearly as deep as saturation divers. Saturation divers go from 600 feet to 1,000 feet underwater. That's almost the height of the Empire State Building. Rising to the surface from that crazy depth can take as long as 2 weeks. It takes less time to go to the moon and back. It's almost impossible to stay in the water for 2 weeks, so divers have a unique trick that keeps them alive. A chamber cleverly designed to have the same pressure as the bottom of the ocean. They spend months in this chamber. The chamber is isolated. It's like being in jail, but much worse. You can't get out no matter what. The world could be on fire, but you'd have to stay inside or pass away. The good news is that divers have the internet there. The chamber is filled with a mixture of helium and oxygen, so if you want to call your family, you will sound funny. Most divers don't call anybody.
Because it's fun to inhale helium and talk in a funny voice for a short time.
But doing it for weeks isn't very pleasant. Now you know more about this type of job and how dangerous it is. Thanks to all those clever tricks, divers can do their job without facing significant risks. But sometimes, bad things are inevitable. So let's return to our story. Chris and Dave had to replace a pipe section and do regular checkups at the bottom of the North Sea. For them, it was like teaching a cat to nap, whatever that is. But the weather above them was not so good. There was a strong wind and waves that reached 13 feet. On the other hand, weather like that was typical for the North Sea, so there was nothing unusual to worry about. The ship carrying out the mission had a crazy feature similar to autopilot. No matter how many waves there were, it would keep the vessel stable. The dive was going smoothly until the alarm started beeping out of nowhere. Dave and Chris immediately climbed in. David made it to the bell safely, but Chris's cord caught the edge of the manifold, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get out. He thought this should not have happened because there was plenty of slackline. He could hear the cord tightening, then realized that the ship had started moving. He had basically become an anchor, and as we all know, humans are not designed to be anchors. The cord snapped, and he fell to the bottom of the sea. This was the worst situation that could happen to him. He lost everything: oxygen, communication, and heat, meaning he would either freeze or suffocate. He had around 5 minutes of emergency O2, but that was not nearly enough to survive. Chris had to climb up to the manifold to be rescued, but when the cord snapped, his light went out, so he had to walk in the pitch-black sea and navigate by feeling around. Chris couldn't even see his hands, but he did the impossible and climbed to the manifold. The problems didn't end there, unfortunately. He was in the worst possible situation, and no one could tell him what to do or what had happened. Every breath was more valuable than a bucket of gold, so he had to breathe super slowly. Chris had only 2 minutes of oxygen left by the time he climbed up, and after some time, when he didn't see any signs of the rescue team, he lost all hope. The ship that was supposed to save him was in chaos. They couldn't stay stable to find him. All odds were against Chris at that moment. The only thing in his favor was that the ship had a small submarine that could be controlled remotely, and the crew could see what had happened to him. They got to the diving spot, and it was like watching a horror movie. You can't look away, and you can't unsee it. They all expected to see the diver in the worst possible shape. By some miracle, he was still moving, but not for long. Hundreds of people were glued to the screen, watching their colleagues suffer. They weren't that far from the site, but they couldn't do anything to save their friend. After the ship had stabilized, they went where Chris was. By that time, they had lost all hope and were going down to recover the body. David was tasked with getting Chris. He was feeling on edge, but prepared mentally for the challenge ahead. Around a half hour later, David finally arrived at the destination. He immediately grabbed Chris and climbed into the bell. Duncan was waiting for them inside. When they arrived, Duncan immediately took off Chris's diving mask. What they saw was horrifying. Chris's face was not the usual color, and he was cold. He looked like he had passed away. Duncan had tried giving him first aid, and suddenly, Chris jumped up, lively as can be, and sat down in his seat. David and Duncan were shocked. Chris seemed to be completely fine. He was examined by lots of doctors and was announced to be as healthy as someone who had spent a half an hour without air could be. By all odds, he shouldn't have survived more than 3 minutes without air. No scientist to this day knows how he survived. It could have been because he had been exposed to a high level of O2 in the chamber, and he also had a higher than normal O2 level in his lungs. The cold temperature could have slowed down his metabolism and prevented him from losing too much energy, but nobody knows for sure. Now, you would think that after this, he would never dive again, but he continues to work as a saturation diver to this day and has no intention of quitting. He even got back to the same spot that nearly destroyed him and finished the job that he had started. Wow.